Scripture this morning is Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
Morning. Y'all glad to be here? You know, I know that God made everything, and I know that everything has its purpose in life. But I have yet to figure out what the purpose is for pollen in the springtime. I think it may be to keep our pharmacies open. I'm not sure, because we do a lot of running back and forth this time of year. There's a lot of sniffling and coughing and such like, and that's just, I don't know. I still don't know what the purpose is, but I'm sure God has a purpose for the pollen in springtime. Might be because animals that have been hibernating all winter needed some type of nourishment, and maybe pollen provides that nourishment. I don't know, but God does, and He had a reason for it. Sometimes in our walk of faith, we get tired or discouraged. That was the case with the disciples just before our scripture reading here. They had been out, they'd been following Jesus, and they'd gone here, there, and yonder, wherever it was Jesus wanted them to go. He had been teaching the crowds, and the crowds had come, and the crowds were always needy. They were coming to him. They wanted to be healed. They wanted to be taken care of. They wanted to be taught. They wanted to come and to touch Jesus. They wanted to get near to him. They wanted all of these things. And the disciples were constantly in the middle of all of this turmoil, trying to follow Jesus themselves, and at the same time trying to keep the crowds away a little bit, because it was difficult. And the crowds were many, and the crowds were boisterous, and the crowds were loud. In this particular case of our text today, Jesus has heard that John the Baptist has been beheaded. The news has been brought to him. Some of his disciples had been John's disciples before they were his own disciples. They knew John well. They loved John well, as Jesus did. And the news was disconcerting at the least. The news was difficult. The news was tragic. The news was heartrending to them because John had been killed. And so they go away to a private place so that they can mourn the loss of their friend. Picture it, they leave the crowds behind, they get to a place that's quiet, and they're trying to, and you know there are stories. I remember when John did such and such. I remember John when he was younger and he did thus and so. I remember when he only had one leather belt. You know, I remember John preaching thus and so, and I remember the way they talked about him. And they were commiserating with one another the loss of their friend. And all of a sudden, the crowds find him. And it's not just a small crowd. We're told in all four gospel accounts, it's one of the few things that's recorded in all four gospel accounts, we're told that there are 5,000 men, not counting women and children, that find them. So it's not a little crowd, it's a big crowd of people that find them. Here he is, here he is, here they are, here they are, here they are. Come on, give us just a few minutes. Give us just a little bit of time to grieve this loss. But no, here we are. And we're hungry. Out of the midst of his own hurt, out of the midst of his own pain, out of the midst of his disciples' pain, Jesus realizes that these people are hungry and they need to be fed. And so he feeds the 5,000 with 2 loaves, or 5 loaves and 2 little fish, and the disciples began passing it out, and it's kind of miraculous. When they got through eating, they picked up 12 baskets full. They picked up more than they started out with. That would be a miracle in and of itself. But the fact that everybody had eaten was a pretty big deal. By the way, if someone in the crowd went away hungry, whose fault was it? It was their own fault. Today, we have salvation from Jesus Christ. And if somebody chooses not to follow Jesus, whose fault is it? It's their own fault. We're not responsible for somebody else's decision. The disciples were responsible for passing out the food. They weren't responsible for feeding the people. I think it's important that we understand that. And that there was plenty to go around. And there was plenty left over because not everybody ate everything. And I think there might be a whole lesson in that sometime if we want to look at that. And so after they had served, and after they had cleaned up the mess, and after everything was over, these guys are tired, remember? They came over there to be alone, to mourn and grieve. They're not in the mood to do all this serving, but after they've done all this serving, Jesus tells them, get in the boat, go across, and I'll join you over there. Here's an idea of how tired they were. You think they even considered how he was going to get there? We're going to take the only boat, and we're going to take off, and he's going to go up on a mountain to pray, and he said he'd join us later. How's he going to get there? Apparently, they didn't even consider the possibility about how he's going to get there. It's the 4th watch of the night. It's about midnight. It's in the midnight hour or so. The storm is strong. The waves and the wind are against them. They haven't gone very far. They hadn't been able to get across the lake. It's not that big of a lake, actually. But they haven't been able to get across the lake because the winds are contrary. The waves are terrible, and they're tough. And these guys, guess what? They're still not getting to relax. They're still not getting to rest. They're still not getting peace to grieve the loss of their friend. None of those things. And then here comes Jesus walking on the water, and he's going to pass by them. That's pretty amazing. The idea that Jesus is walking on the water was pretty amazing. The idea that he wasn't walking just to them was pretty amazing. The idea that he's going by them and they say, hey, it's a ghost. And I'm sure they were just that calm about it, right? I think they were terrified. That's what it says. They were terrified, thinking it was a ghost. And they shouted out. They thought it was a ghost. They were certain that they were about to be swallowed by the sea. Because you know what I would think? If I'm a seasoned sailor, if I'm a seasoned fisherman and I'm out there in this boat, the storm's so tough, the boat's being tossed about, the wind is against us, it's the middle of the night, there's no hope in sight, waves crashing around all over the place. They didn't have street lights out in the middle of the ocean. There's nothing there to give them any kind of hope at all. And here comes a ghost walking on the water. I think I'm about to drown. If I'm seeing ghosts already, I'm about to drown. And that's what they thought too. They thought it was the end. But it was Jesus. After a little while, he's going to get in the boat with them after a little adventure with Peter. And the waves are going to calm and the wind's going to calm and they're going to be amazed at his power. But Peter has to have a little adventure in the meantime. You know the story of Peter. He knew the danger. He knew what would happen if he got into that water away from the boat. And yet he'd rather be with Jesus than in the boat with everybody else. And so he's willing. He says, Lord, if it's you, command me to come out into the water. Not ask me, command me to. Because he wants Jesus' command to control the water. He doesn't want, Lord, if it's you, let me jump out of the boat and I'll swim to you. No, command me to come to you on the water. Maybe he just wanted to walk on water. That'd be pretty cool. But Matthew says they were terrified. And so he did it because he was terrified and he wanted to get wherever Jesus was because he knew he'd be safe wherever Jesus was. And I think there's an important message for us. If we want to get close to Jesus, sometimes we've got to get out of our comfort boat. Because sometimes we're awfully comfortable in our boats. Sometimes our boats are rocking and rolling in the midst of the storms of life, and we'd like to get out of the boat. But we don't always have the courage to get out of the comfort boat and step out onto the water in the midst of the storm. If you were looking for people to change the world, what qualities would you look for? Because Jesus, that's what he did. Oh, I think we'd look for courage and intelligence, wouldn't we? That would be pretty important. And probably charisma, or maybe even creativity. And they may be important and they may be essential, but Jesus was looking for something else. And that's something that we need to understand. Patrick Lenny, I can't say his name. Lencioni, how's that? That's the best try I'm going to get, and I'm not going to say it again, I hope, or try again. He said when he graduated from college, like so many other young graduates, he was ready to change the world. He was going to make a difference. He was going to defy conventional wisdom. He was going to confront the status quo. He was going to challenge the process. And he had read all the books, and he knew all the answers, and he was going to go absolutely transform the world. He said, but there were two big problems with his postgraduate zeal. Number one, he had no specific idea about what difference he wanted to make. He just knew he wanted to make a difference. The truth was, he had more interest in making a difference than actually what difference he made. The truth was, he actually wanted to be known for making some changes in the world, but he didn't really have any idea what changes needed to be made. And the second problem was that there were limits on his desire to change the world. He wanted to change the world as long as he could have a good job while he did it. He wanted to change the world as long as his paycheck came in while he was doing it. He wanted to transform the whole world as long as he had his wife and his children and his house. You see, he wasn't willing to pay the price necessarily. He wrote this, sure, I can deal with some hard work, maybe even temporary financial setbacks, but real suffering, embarrassment, rejection by loved ones, no thank you. I don't want to make that big a difference. And that's the way we are sometimes in our Christian walk, in our Christian zeal. Oh, we can deal with a little bit of hardship in our Christian walk. We can deal with, okay, we don't drink and we don't smoke and we don't cuss and we don't do those kind of things. By the way, young ladies, remember, I don't drink, I don't cuss, I don't chew, and I don't go with boys who do, right? That's the way it's supposed to go. We need to understand these things. And we can deal with those things. Oh, and we can deal with giving up a tithe of our income to the church, and we can live on the 90%. The government doesn't leave us with 90%, but God does. We can live on the 90%, and we can do that. We can deal with the giving up of our time to be here for worship service, and we can do that. But we really don't want to be rejected by our friends and loved ones, do we? We really don't want to be social pariahs in this world. One of my friends has recently taken a new job, and he says that in his job, he handles or he deals with all kinds of people from all walks of life, and he was told by his employer, you don't talk about politics and you don't talk about religion. There's a couple of other things that you're not allowed to mention at all. Isn't it sad that we live in a world where we're a pariah for talking about our faith. We ought to be able always to talk about our faith. We ought to be able to understand that. So before we start this idea of reaching the world for Jesus, which is our command from him, we might need to answer a couple of questions that will help us to do it. The first question has to do with answering this idea of leading the world is, who am I really serving? Who am I really serving? With your life, day to day, who are you really serving? You know, Jesus talks about people whose God is their belly. All they're about is, what can I get to eat? How can I please me? We live in a society that's very hedonistic in so many ways that it's all about me. And I'm not going to say me very many times because Charlie will quote me on it and then I'll be in a lot of trouble. But we live in a society that's all about, how do I please myself? And so we go through life trying to please ourselves. And whatever makes us happy, we do. We spend our money on the things that make us feel good. Well, if I want to go fishing, I don't care if my children are going to go without food, I'm going fishing. If I want a new TV, I don't care that I haven't paid the electric bill yet this month and I'm not going to be able to watch it, I'm going to go buy the new TV. If you really want to have some fun, go to Walmart on Black Friday and stand in the electronics section and watch people fight over the newest, biggest, boldest TV set, or even better, and it's much more fun, on the Saturday before the Super Bowl, go in there and watch people trying to get that 87-inch flat screen TV, because they've got to have it so they can watch the Super Bowl. But if you want even more fun, go back Monday after that and watch them returning the TVs, because they couldn't afford it. But they got to watch the Super Bowl on the big screen TV. I wonder about things like that sometimes. I wonder, because Jesus gave us a task, and who are we really serving in the world? You know, ultimately, Jesus made sure we understood that the mission wasn't about him. It wasn't about saving the world to him so that he could be glorified, although he is glorified. He's been given a name above all others. He's been given a name at which every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord, to the glory of God his Father. But Jesus didn't say, hey, I called everybody so you can come to me and worship me. He said, no. He said, really? He says, I don't speak on my own authority. And the miracles that I do, the Father's the one that does those works. You see, Jesus came to glorify God. And I think sometimes we forget to glorify God in the midst of worshiping Jesus. There are whole churches that worship Jesus and forget about God. There are other churches that worship God and forget about Jesus. And I wonder sometimes at the validity of either one of those positions. Jesus said we ought to constantly recognize God. And so he sought no glory for himself. When he fed the 5,000, you guys go ahead. I'm going to send the crowd away, and then I'm going to go up on the mountain to pray. When he healed Jairus' daughter, he said, give her something to eat, and there's nothing more said about him being there in the story. He apparently disappeared into the crowd. When he did the things that he did, he didn't do them for his glory, but for the glory of God, and we need to answer that. So what would have happened is, if Jesus had been asked the question, who are you serving, or who am I serving? His answer would have been pretty obvious from his life. I'm serving my Father and his people. He wasn't serving himself. In fact, had he been serving himself, he could have turned the stones to bread. Had he been serving himself, he could have had all of the world at his feet. Had he been serving himself, he could have gone through life without ever facing a crucifixion. But he didn't, and he wasn't. And he died for you and for me because he was serving us and following the Father. You know, for a Christian, this is paramount, because it's only through this suffering process that we can really come to a full understanding about Jesus. And it's only through this process that we can have the love for each other that we're supposed to have. Paul writes to the church at Philippi, a church that's having some difficulty. He says, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being found in the form of God did not consider it something to be grasped, but he humbled himself and became like one of us. A little bit later, he says to them that be with Euodia and Syntyche, these two sisters, these two dear sisters who've labored with me in the Lord, that they be of the same mind. Be humble. Care about one another. Be a part of one another's lives. As Christians, we need to do that. You know, if you really want to know what humility looks like, look at the politicians and the actors and the other great performers in the world that you see and live differently from them. Because they don't seem to have very much humility. They wouldn't be on the stage if their idea didn't start off with, look at me. That's where it starts. And we've got too many look at me Christians in the world when we ought to be saying, look at Jesus. Look at God. Look at the great gift he's given us. The second question is, am I prepared to suffer? You know, Jesus said all of his disciples would suffer. He said, everyone will hate you on account of my name. You know, I think sometimes we think everybody's going to love us because we're Christians, and that's not the plan. If everybody loves us because of our Christianity, we're doing it wrong. It's just honest. Some of the things we stand up for, the world is opposed to. There's no question about that. At least it ought to be that way. You know, Jesus paid the price in full when it came time to transform the world's life. He not only accepted death on the cross, but he took the beating. He took the scourgings. He took the being slapped in the face and being spit on. He took all of those things quietly. Like a lamb before it shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. That's the way Isaiah would speak of it 700 years before his birth. It's the way Isaiah would write about it. Sometimes I think it's easy to overlook that part of it. You know, I read and had somebody actually listened to somebody one time read about, and so I had to read it for myself to see it, the physical torment that went into Christ's crucifixion. Crowned with thorns. I'm sure they gently set him on his head, right? I'm sure whoever did it had gloves on and they nailed him down as best they could. Whipped, spit upon, forced to carry a heavy cross, his hands and his feet nailed to the wood, pierced with a lance as his lungs filled with fluid, and he died an unimaginable death in excruciating pain. But even more than the physical pain, think of the psychological stress that he went through. The most holy man on the face of the earth. The most holy man ever to walk the face of the earth. Stripped of all his clothing in public. Ridiculed, spit on, mocked in front of his family and his friends. Taunted by the criminals who are being crucified on either side of him, who are guilty of their sins, and they're making fun of him. Don't you think even now I could call out to my Father and he would send hosts of angels? Don't you think he was tempted as he hung on that cross in the midst of all that to come down? And yet he stayed, because that's what we needed. One of the most touching books you'll ever read is Fox's Book of Christian Martyrs. It tells the story of Christians who were beheaded or buried alive or hung on crosses, murdered in all kinds of horrible ways for their faith in Christ. You know, these were great people of faith, like John the Baptist and Peter and Paul, Joan of Arc, William Tyndale, and Thomas More and others. And it's not just in world history that we see that. In American history, we've had people who have tried to change the world, who have found themselves just absolutely destroyed for their faith or for their efforts. You know, they all led brave lives. but they weren't very glorious for the most part. Sure, I'm sure in their minds they thought, hey, in the future, people are going to look back on me and see the great difference I made. And I'm not sure that's true at all. I think they went through life trying to do the best they could with what they had, and the result is their lives speak volumes now. But they had one thing in common. They had one thing very much in common. They didn't live to see the results of their work. They didn't live to see the glory or the honor that we bestow on their names today. In fact, many of them were hated. Many of them were rejected by their closest family and friends. Many of them faced life all by themselves and faced death alone with only the confidence of their faith. Did they fail? No, they didn't fail. They didn't fail at all. But how were they measured by worldly standards? They weren't rich. Some of them were a little famous for a little while. You know, you wonder sometimes, most of those great Christians, they died lonely, broken, their impact occurring long after their death, and maybe even then without any credit given to them at all. I would ask some of the names that we mentioned. William Tyndale, you may or may not know his name. You ought to. What William Tyndale was burned at the stake for was because he was so bold as to translate the Bible into English so that common people could know the Word of God. That's why he got the death penalty. Because the church at the time did not want the common people to know the Word of God. They wanted only the priest to interpret it for them. And so his death sentence, you hold in your hands all the time. How valuable that is when you think of the cost of that book that you hold in your hands. I love the group Casting Crowns. I love their song, Crazy People. You know their song, Crazy People? If not, we're going to share a little bit of Crazy People. They say in the song, who builds a boat with no clouds in sight? Who walks up to a giant and picks the fight? Who turns a lion's den into a petting zoo? Who can have church in the fire of furnace? Who brings a Bible into public school? Who shares a gospel even when the world calls them a fool? Who's not afraid to go against the floor? Will they cancel me and call one of those, because I'm one of those? Who sees the world as a mission field? That's crazy. Who talks to Jesus like he's real? That's pretty crazy. Who believes in the words in red? That's crazy. Who says he's coming back again? That's crazy. The chorus says, crazy people trust in Jesus, following him wherever he leads us. Kingdom seekers, walk by faith believers. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Here's to all of God's crazy people. Maybe we ought to be just a little crazy in our faith and have enough strength, be willing to suffer the consequences sometimes, because if we're going to evangelize our world, we have to persevere in the face of challenges. You know, fortunately, it's unlikely that any of us are going to be burned at the stake for our faith. Fortunately, it's unlikely that any of us are going to be fed to lions or anything like that because of our faith. Fortunately, most of us will not be let out into an arena and have to face legions of soldiers who can't wait to kill us because of our faith. But you know, there are many around the world who can't say that today. There are many Christians in the world today who literally are meeting in fear of being found out. And we ought to pray for them. And what we ought to realize is that it's just that far from being here as well. It just takes that much. So how do we prepare ourselves for it? James Koussis and Barry Posner, in their book Leadership Challenge, says people with a hearty attitude take charge. I would put change, but they take charge. They risk turmoil, the strains of life. Well, they take change, risk turmoil, and the strains of life and strive. When they encounter a stressful event, whether it's positive or negative, they act predictively. They consider the event engaging. They feel they can influence the outcome, and they see it as an opportunity for development. Now, as we see that, and we say, oh, well, that's easy to say. Those are fancy words. Those are nice words. How does it apply to me in real life? And the answer is, in real life, Christ called us to come into a world where things are uncertain. And so he says to his disciples, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? Doesn't do any good to worry. You just go about and you do the things you have to do. And he tells them, when they bring you to the synagogues, don't worry about what you're going to answer. The words will come to you at the time. But you notice the key part of that? When they bring you, not if they bring you. When they persecute you, not if they persecute you. When they hate you, not if they hate you. It's because they hated me first. That's what he says. And so it's very real that things can sometimes be very hard. And it comes down a lot of times to just persevering. You know, it's hard sometimes to ask my friend, would you like to have a Bible study? Most of us probably would be terrified at the idea of going up to a stranger, especially saying, would you like to have a Bible study? Let's go knock on the doors of strangers and ask them, do they want to have a Bible study? Do you want to let this weird guy in your house and study the Bible with him? No. Okay, most of us are afraid of that. Most of us would probably find that uncomfortable, okay? But you know, if you don't ever risk anything and you don't ever ask, you'll never achieve anything. There's no telling how many incomplete passes. There's no telling how many times he got sacked. There's no telling how many interceptions Patrick Mahomes has thrown in his life. But we remember him as a Super Bowl champion quarterback. We see his success and we celebrate that. You know, it's a pretty amazing thing. Bill Gates and Paul Allen designed a microprocessor to analyze, you know, those little rubber strips that they put across the road for traffic counting? They actually invented a microprocessor to analyze the data from those little strips. And they went to show the design to the city of Los Angeles so that they could get paid for their design, and on that day it failed. Failed miserably. Failed so miserably that their company, Trafo Data, that they had founded, failed miserably as well, and they had to take bankruptcy. So, being the people that they were, Paul Allen and Bill Gates started another company, and they named it Microsoft. You've probably heard of it. You've probably seen the results of their millions and millions of dollars. When he was 22 years old, Walt Disney was working for a newspaper in Missouri, and they fired him. Here's what they said when they fired him. It's on his resume from that newspaper. He was not creative enough. Vera Wang was a figure skater. She was in high school, and that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to be on the U.S. Olympic figure skating team. She wanted to be a champion, world champion. And she went to the U.S. Nationals, the finals, and she didn't win. And so she went back frustrated, went to college, got her degree, went to work for Vogue magazine. After a while, she got passed over for promotion 2 or 3 times because she, quote from her resumes, had no fashion sense. In 1989, when she was engaged, she looked around and she couldn't find a wedding dress that she liked, and so she designed her own. And people liked it. So she opened up her own studio on Madison Avenue, and now Vera Wang is one of the most respected and desired, sought-after wedding dress designers in the whole world. But she's a failure. Colonel Harlan Sanders, whoo, you talk about a failure. Man, there's a failure. He tried to start several companies. was fired from a number of jobs. He personally says he got 1,109 no's before he found a single restaurant that would try his chicken recipe, which, by the way, wasn't his chicken recipe. He bought it from this little place where he stopped to eat chicken one time, and he thought their chicken was really good, so he bought their recipe. Nobody else would buy it from him. He thought he was going to be rich. At one point, his wife left him because he was constantly trying to get rich. But I bet most of us have eaten Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think most of us recognize that. Daniel Overdorf, you don't know who he is probably. He's a professor of Bible at Johnson College in Tennessee, and I was pleased to get to sit in his class this last Thursday all day. And I heard him at the Harding University Preachers Conference, and he told of going to lecture about the Bible in China. And they wanted him to lecture about the Bible, but the rule was you can't do any evangelism while you're here. And so to make sure he didn't get in trouble for disobeying the rule, they sent 2 Chinese national security guards who followed him and stayed beside him all the time to make sure he didn't get in trouble by trying to evangelize somebody, or maybe to watch and see if he did. But they were allowed to answer questions. So he says after one of his lectures, these 7 people, 4 guys and 3 girls, came up to him after the lecture, and they said, "We have a question about your God." And he said, "Well, what question do you have?" And they said, "Can you tell us one of his stories?" He says, "I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to say. So I started off on the story of the prodigal son." He says, and I told him about how a boy had left his father and how he had denied his whole family, and he had wandered off, and he had gone to a place where they were even making him feed pigs, and that was against his religion to even have anything to do with the pigs, and yet he was doing that, and he was so hungry he was willing to eat. And he says as he told the story, he noticed that some of them nodded quite a bit, and they seemed to understand his story. And he got to a certain point, and he talked about the boy coming home after he came to his senses, and the father rushing out to greet him and welcoming him home. And he said there were tears in their eyes, and one of the girls asked him and said, "Hey, is that the way your God really is?" And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly the way our God really is." Said he looked around, and all 7 of the students were crying. And one of his 2 guards was crying as well at the story of Jesus. We live in a world where people are crying out to hear the story of Jesus. And we sit in our comfortable boats sometimes, and we're afraid to get out in the middle of the storm. And yet if we'll get out and walk with Jesus, it's amazing what we can do in the world we live in. Maybe it's time we looked at the storm, we saw Jesus standing there in the water, and we stepped out of our comfort zones to go walk with him. Crying about our God when they heard his story for the first time. Maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said the gates of hell can't keep people from coming to him if we'll just tell them about Jesus. This morning, you may be a child of God and everything's hunky-dory in your life, and you're going to sing at the top of your lungs to praise God during the invitation song. This morning, you may be a child of God and everything's not hunky-dory in your life, and during the song, while everybody else is singing at the top of their lungs, you're going to talk to God, and you're going to make sure you've got everything right in your lives, because at least once a week we come together to examine ourselves and to make sure we're right with God. This morning, you may be a child of God, and when we start singing, you're going to say, "I need help," and you're going to walk down the aisle, and you're going to say, "Hey, I need prayers." And one of the elders will pray for you, and we'll all pray with you, and we'll help you to get back on the right path. This morning, you might not be a child of God. And it's time for you to come to that God who loves you so much that he will run to you. If you need to be baptized, if you need to respond in any way, we're here to help you, and we'll encourage you while we sing